Okay, so here's your icebreaker question for today. Have you ever had a tough decision to make, and how did you make the decision? Have you ever had a tough decision to make, and how did you make the decision? Talk about that with your group, and when you're ready to dive into the scriptures, we will get started. So we're in the book of Romans right now, and we're up to the point where we're going to be diving into chapter 6 here. But before we get into it, what I want to do is review at least the most recent chapter, chapter 5, and the concepts that we've talked about over the last couple of weeks leading up to this point. The Apostle Paul is talking about concepts that he uses terms for, uses Greek words for that we get translated into English that have specific meaning. And because of that, this passage is oftentimes one that people struggle with, especially the last two passages, the last 2 weeks that we've looked at. And so I just want to walk you through sort of a whiteboard of what this looks like. It starts with an understanding of Adam. Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, and they were given instructions by God that there were two trees in the middle of the garden that had special purposes. The one was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If they eat of that, they will surely die. The other one was the tree of life, and if they eat that, then they will continue to live forever. We know the rest of the story. Adam and Eve both decide that they're going to eat from the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, the one for which they will die. And after that, God kicks them out of the Garden of Eden. And because they get kicked out of the Garden of Eden, they cannot reach out and eat from the tree of life and so live forever. The result is that they die. Now, the passage that we saw last week and the week before is helping us to understand how that affects all of us. Adam eats the fruit that is forbidden. When he does that, it's called a transgression or a trespass. In other words, he crosses the line, he goes against God. Then he is kicked out of the garden, and that is the word sin. Sin is separation or no share. In this case, no share in the Garden of Eden, no share in the tree of life, if you will. And so Adam is separated, sin, from the Garden of Eden and from the tree of life. And because he can't eat the tree of life, the result of that is death. Well, the angel blocks the way and has the flaming sword so that not only can't Adam and Eve get back in, but none of their descendants can get back in either. And so the result for all of us is that all of us are separated from God, and all of us also experience death. One in every one person dies, is the way I describe it. And there's nothing that we can do about that. So then, what about me? And what about you? And being separated from God? Does God punish us for the sin of Adam? And are we separated forever? Well, that's when we get into the rest of last week and also starting to get into this week as well. See, if I look at me, um, there's nothing I can do about that death that comes because of Adam. My body is going to break down and die, just like everybody else's. But I decide whether I'm going to be separated from God in the future or not, and so do you. The way that we make that decision is not by choosing to eat fruit from a tree or not. We're kicked out of the garden. We can't make that decision anyway. But God gives us a law, God's law, which tells us what is right and what is wrong. When we do what is right, when we choose to be with God, or as we say at LifeBridge, walk together with God, then we are considered righteous. We are above the line, if you will, and we will get to be with God in the next life forever and ever. When this body dies, we have a second opportunity to choose life or death. When we break God's law, that is our own transgression. And when we do it in a way that deserves death, then that transgression, the wages of that transgression is sin. We are separated from God, which results in death. And what we saw last week is the description of what's called the second death, which is the lake of burning sulfur. Oftentimes people refer to that as hell. But the big thing is that it is separation from God forever and ever. Unfortunately, you and I can't get back in to the presence of God once we cross that line. The only way to balance out the scales of justice is to pay the price, and the price of our transgression is the penalty of death. Well, that's where Jesus enters into this whole thing. Jesus never has a transgression. He doesn't go up against God. Therefore, he does not get separated from God, sin. And because he's not separated from God, he doesn't deserve death. But he goes to the cross and takes death anyway. And when he does, he pays the price not for himself. He doesn't have to pay the price for himself. And so he has that as extra, if you will, in his account. And he offers to use that to pay the price for your transgression and for mine. When he does, he gives it to us as a gift. And that gift balances out the scales of justice and makes us right again with God. We are made righteous, and we get to, once again, walk together with God. The question then becomes, do I want to accept the death of Jesus, receive the death of Jesus as the payment for my transgression, which results in separation from God? And so this passage then is talking about how we receive Jesus's death as the payment for our transgression. So read this passage, talk about this. I know that there's a lot of different interpretations and different ways that teachers and preachers teach this. So I just want you to read the passage and go back to the passage, not what you have been taught before. What is the benefit of dying with Jesus? And according to this passage, how do we die with Jesus? Read the passage, talk about that. When you're ready to continue, you can press play on the video. For a lot of folks, baptism is something that gets defined differently depending on the church or denomination that you go to. But the word very simply means to dunk or to dip or to immerse. It was a Greek word that was used for talking about, like, if I wanted to dye this shirt and make it this color, this maroon reddish color, what I would do is baptizo it or bapto it down into the vat of dye. The baptism that's talked about here is a baptism of water. And when we go down into the waters of baptism and we are lowered and completely immersed into it, we are being buried, if you will, with Christ. If we were to stay there, we would physically die. But what we're doing is we're imagining ourselves dying with Christ. And then when we come up out of the water, we are raised with him to a new life. There's tremendous significance to this imagery of baptism. And the choice that we make to identify ourselves with the death of Jesus and to receive that gift from him. There are many other passages that talk to this as well. But we're just going through Romans, so we're just going to go through this passage right now. When you come back up out of the waters then, we are now no longer separated from God. We are with God. We have, as the prodigal son came home, we have come home to God, to the Father. And the Father has received us with open arms, welcomed us, thrown a party, celebrated with us. And now we get to live at home, walking together with God. He talks about that in this next passage then. And so I just want to encourage you to read this and talk about talk about this. And wherever the word sin is there, just think in your mind separation from God. Therefore, do not let separation from God reign in your mortal body, things like that. So as you're reading through it, think about that word as being separated from God, and now we are no longer separated from God. And so the question is, what does it look like to live life with Jesus? What does it look like to live life walking with God? And how is that different from a life of separation and death, or sin and death? Read the passage, talk about that, and then pray for one another that we will all choose to live a life with Jesus. Know that I'm praying for you as well. And I ask you to pray for me that every choice that I make will be one where I am living a life with Jesus each step of the way. God bless.